so I said at the beginning of the tour, and I know we've had a couple of add-ons since then, but this museum started because Dan bought a tank that he wanted to put in our parade. And that was that tank right there. And it wasn't running in time. And the pictures I've seen, there's actually a sapling growing out of that top hatch on that turret. So that one wasn't ready in time, so then he buys this one, and this whole, the way I describe it is the madness spread from there. He says this became his passion project, and I think that's probably a much more charitable way of saying it, so I'll say it that way. But this is definitely, yeah, so you see more of Dan's passion for sure. So I said back there that we start dumping more equipment, more vehicles, more weapons on the battlefield, and this is a fine example of that. This is actually a later war model of a Sherman tank, but we produced 50,000, not quite 50,000 of these things. We produced 53,000 half-tracks. Just the amount of stuff that we can dump on the battlefield, nobody else can come close to. So this one here, if you see that Brad Pitt's cruising around with it.
In the movie Fury.
This one over here first. That's an M4A3. This is an M4A1. So yeah, earlier model. And remember I said you couldn't weld the armor plates together because it left a fragile point. And then you also didn't want to use the rivets because that's a problem as well. So this is a cast steel hull. You got no rivets. You got no welding. What you do have are these applique patches that they put on here because the armor itself is still a little bit thin against some of these big German guns. So this one protects the driver, the assistant driver, and this one protects the main gun ammunition, the big cannon shells. They're mostly stored right in here. One of the strengths that a Sherman tank had, other than just sheer brute numbers of the things, is this is a relatively easy vehicle to maintain in the field. I said relatively. Now, some of a lot of you guys are familiar with the idea of that Tiger tank, a big German Tiger tank, big heavy tank, and that sucker is a Cadillac. This is, how do I describe this? My first car, the first thing I drove was a 66 Buick LeSabre. So this is a Buick LeSabre. It'll get the job done. It got me to school and back. It got me on my first couple of dates. But this is not a Cadillac. One of the things I always like to point out is what makes this relatively simple to operate and maintain is this system right here. It's called a bogie. So you got two ground wheels, you got a return wheel up here, and you got a little suspension system in there. If the bogie goes bad, you got 16 bolts. You unscrew them, you put an Owen in, and boom, you're back on the road again. These big Sherman or these big German Tiger tanks, for instance, they had 16 road wheels, all laid in a very particular order. And if you want to replace one of them, you got to take all these other ones out. Typically, you just take all of them out. This thing is, again, relatively easy to maintain. All right, so let's talk about my Easy 8 over here. Oh, goodness. M4, A3, E8, 76W. And that whole list of alphabet soup, all that means is it's still a Sherman tank and it's been upgraded. So you've got a different suspension system, you got a better motor, you got a better transmission, your armor you see is better. So now we can actually weld this stuff effectively. And what that does is, actually the steel is better. So you don't have to have these big applique patches anymore. You've got more room on the inside for storage or headroom or whatever. You've got room for a bigger hatch. So this is there's just improvement just by welding that. And even if this vehicle is bigger, I'm here to tell you this tank is not designed for a 6'1" fat guy with a bad shoulder. This is no idea if it's true, but I'm going to tell it till somebody says it's not, and then I'll stop. But in the meat, this is Soviet logic. So you line all your soldiers up, tallest to shortest. And the tallest guys, y'all make cannon cockers, you make them artillerymen. The shortest guys, y'all make them tankers, and everybody else is infantry. And again, I have no idea if that's actually true, but that just sounds like the Soviet logic. Yeah, go ahead.
My wife asked another really good question. She
Sure.
said, how do you see when the hatch lid is down? There's a periscope right there.
Right here.
When you're driving, you look in there.
Yep.
And it's got two mirrors at
Yep.
45 degrees,
Yep.
so they go up.
That's exactly right.
And you can see somewhat
Right
ahead
there.
of
So
you.
here's the outside of the periscope, and here's the inside of the periscope. So when the hatch is down, and you have to have the hatch down when you're fighting one of these things, because otherwise, it's almost this armor is now not helping you anymore. So you look through that little periscope. So the problem is the enemy knows you're going to look at that periscope too. So if you've got a guy with a good shot with a rifle, or a smoke grenade, or any number of things, if I can attack and hit that periscope lens, now you're blind on the inside. So the way we overcome that is every single periscope on this vehicle, we've got seven replacements for each one of them. So one gets busted from the inside, you unscrew a couple of bolts, you take it out, you put the next one in, and you're back to fighting again. But yeah, and that's relatively good. What you can see on that is about this big. So there's a German tank over here that I got a chance to drive this winter, and the vision slot on that's about this big. It's tiny. I don't know how you're supposed to fight these things because your visibility is so limited. But they were able to overcome that, and this is still a fantastic fighting vehicle. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get around the corner. Do you guys have any other questions? And the strength in half tracks was, again, not just that we produced 53,000 of them, but that these things, there's a universality to the parts. If I break a part, I lose a part, something happens, something gets shot on one, I've got a whole pile of them in back, and it really doesn't matter who manufactured the vehicle, I can give you a new part. Now, they were manufactured by about a half dozen different companies, and they're all virtually the same. There are differences. For instance, the International Harvester had a diesel motor, whereas all the rest of them are gasoline. But the strength on this thing is, with just very minor modifications, you can put whole different weapon systems on all these. So the first one I've got a mortar. I had a school group come through, and a fifth grader asked me, what are those rolling pins on the front? So she knew what her question was, but she just didn't have the vocabulary for it, and that's fine. Those rolling pins are actually called trench rollers. And so what happens is, if you're driving along and you hit a trench or a shell hole or a creek bed or something, you hit that, and that is going to facilitate bouncing up and over as opposed to burying the nose of your truck in the mud. So with my luck, I know I'm going to hit that, and even though it's spring-loaded in there, I'm probably going to leave half a dozen of my front teeth on the steering wheel, but that's a whole lot better than being completely stuck in the mud while some German 88 shooting at me. And you'll notice the ones on either end actually have big old winches on them. So when you get stuck, you can pull yourself out. When I get stuck, you can pull me out too, at which point I owe you a case of beer. Because a case of beer is the going rate for pulling me out of the mud or out of the snow. All right, let's come up this way. A large vehicle, you need a track recovery vehicle, a tank recovery vehicle, an armor recovery vehicle, whatever you want to call it. It's a wrecker. That's all it is. You got grease guns, you got an oxyacetylene system that you can cut, you can weld, you can do whatever you need. Again, one of my fifth graders asked me if these are spare tires for a tank. Yeah, that's exactly what those are. One of the things you'll notice about this vehicle is, if you look closely, this is the exact same hull and chassis as that EZ8 I was on over there. All you do is you put a different turret on it, you put some different accessories on the outside, and you've got a completely different piece of equipment, but you're not having to reinvent the wheel. You will notice that what this does not have is a main gun. There's no big tank gun on this thing. It's not an offensive weapon. This is to keep my other fighting tanks running. This thing is literally and figuratively worth its weight in gold. But its whole job, its whole reason for existence is to keep those boys fighting. So what it does have, instead of that big gun, you got those four, again, fifth graders, you got those 4 green Pringles cans in the front there. What are these Pringles cans? They're smoke dispensers. So if somebody starts shooting at me, I can pop smoke, and I can hide behind my smoke screen, and then I go hide behind a building or a hill or a forest or whatever, and I let my fighters take care of what they need to take care of, and then I come back and then I start replacing bogies or whatever I need to fix on there. So no main gun. This one here does not have a main gun either. It's a hunk of steel that's been, it's just a steel pipe that's been welded on there. We call that a Quaker gun. It's just there for looks.
Decoy.
It's a decoy. So maybe you'll think twice about shooting at me because I might shoot back at you with something bigger. But that's all that is. It's just a decoy. Exactly right. All right. Let's talk about our field artillery over here. The king of battle, as the artillery's been known. And I might be a little biased because I used to be a surveyor for the field artillery, but I want to talk about these guns here. I love my big guns. This one is a 155 millimeter gun. This one, guys, I think there's some more benches. Come on in, come on in. So 155 millimeter gun, this is a 105 millimeter gun. Now, since World War II, everything about these two guns has changed. The barrels, the carriage, the recoil systems, all of this has been changed. What hasn't is we still use 155 millimeter caliber rounds today. Each one of these guns, either one of these guns, can fire a projectile perhaps 8 miles with devastating accuracy. This thing can shoot this thing can shoot 10 rounds a minute. This can shoot 6 rounds a minute. We are throwing a lot of fire, we're throwing a lot of steel. So we had really good guns. We had a better FDC, a Fire Direction Center, and our forward observers, the guys up front who were spotting, they had equipment that they could just very exactly locate an enemy target. And with all of this, again, our artillery is devastating. Beyond that, we had ammunition in medium mountains. We could use ammunition prodigiously. So, I don't know, there's a pack of trees over there. What's behind them? I don't know. Let's fire a couple of rounds and see what happens. The Germans, on the other hand, almost had to kind of budget their ammunition. Because if they knew that there was an assault coming up, then they had to slow down their rate of fire. The other thing about the German artillery is I read it, it was described as being, it was okay, but it was uninspired. So it was nothing special. Now, the way these work is, let's talk about this one here. This is a 155 millimeter also. This one they call the Long Tom because this thing could fire around 15 miles. And again, very accurately. If you got an FDC and a gun crew and an FO who all know what they're doing, that very first round you could put in a target the size of my windshield of my pickup truck from 12 or 15 miles away. These guys are good. So you see in the movies, you know, they're ranging in their artillery and add 200 and left, you know, and you can do that, but all that time gives your enemy a chance to seek cover, to get out of the area entirely, jump in a foxhole, hide in a bunker, whatever. So if you're putting that first round on target first time, he's got no place to hide. And then on top of that, our FDCs were so good that you might have, say, 3 different batteries all located in different locations, and we're all going to fire at the same target all at once. And the FDC is able to time it so all 3 of these batteries firing from different directions all actually hit the target at the same time. Our artillery is absolutely devastating. What makes it even more effective is that any one of these guns, any one of them, you've got all kinds of different sorts of shells. So high explosive, shrapnel, anti-tank, smoke, leaflets. You could drop leaflets with one of these things if you had to. When we get into the Cold War, that thing right there will shoot a nuke. But you've got all these different kinds of weapons, or all these different kinds of effects, and you got different timers you put on them. Is it an aerial burst? Is it a ground burst? Is it whatever? So you add all these in there, and then this is your gunpowder here. The gunpowder comes in varying size bags, from smaller to larger, and then the FDC will say, I want you to put, for instance, 2 bags, 3 bags, whatever in there, and you're going to shoot an HE quick, whatever. So you get the orders, and you fire this thing, and this is a very, very versatile system. It's extremely, extremely effective. All right, let's come across the way. 7 millimeter that was on top of that Lee tank, or Grant tank, I guess, that I was leaning on back there. So you could pop a track off of somebody maybe, but other than that, you're not stopping an enemy tank. Also, since that's a towed system, it's a little cumbersome. In order to get it from one part of the battlefield to the other, you have to hook it up behind a truck or a Jeep or a half track or something and hope you can actually get from one point to the other. So it's not a good system all the way around. So we're going to make it a little bit more mobile, and we're going to put that same gun in a 3/4 ton or maybe a 1 ton truck. I've seen plans for putting them in a Jeep, which was just absolutely did not work. But you got a little bit more mobility, but a 32 caliber pistol is going to stop that thing because you poke a hole in the radiator and it's done. So we get a little better. We got a half track with a bigger gun. This next towed vehicle right here, this 3-inch gun, is an effective gun. This will start punching holes through enemy tanks at moderate to short ranges. But again, its mobility is lacking. These next 3 vehicles that look like tanks are properly tank destroyers. So you take a tank chassis, you don't put near as much armor on it, you put the biggest honking gun you can find on that thing, and this thing, his whole job, his only reason for existence is killing enemy tanks. We're going to sneak up on you with other scouts, we're going to find out where you are, we're going to jump up behind you, and we're going to bushwhack you, and then we're going to run. Because I don't want to stand here and take shots back from you. I can't survive that. That middle tank destroyer right there is an M18 Hellcat. That sucker has a 60-mile-an-hour speed on roads. You're doing 60 miles an hour on the road. Trucks, Jeeps that have a hard time doing 60 miles an hour on the road. That makes it good. We don't have a tracked vehicle in our arsenal that can do that kind of speed as we get to the mid-80s and the M1 battle tanks. And that last vehicle down there is the M36 Jackson. That's got a 90-millimeter main gun on it, and that'll punch holes in I don't care what you got. That'll kill a Tiger tank, that'll kill a Tanker tank, that is a mean weapon. Now, the reason I'm telling you all is not so much about the weapons platforms themselves, although obviously I can kind of keep on this. Things for military use, and with trucks it was much more of a simple switchover. Typically, change the color of the paint on it, and you got a military truck. Not typically, but frequently enough. So in this section, we've got trucks, manufacturers that all of us have kind of heard about. Mack trucks, and we got Fords, and we got Jimmys and GMs. We've also got Whites, we've got Ward LaFrance, we've got Autocar, we've got, there's an REO in here somewhere, there's a Studebaker in here somewhere. All these companies that were manufacturing vehicles, they start churning out these tanks, or these trucks, these vehicles right here. And they were used for, and the reason we can use this right here, we can now talk about the Red Ball Express. So the Red Ball Express was a bunch of transportation battalions that just kind of get amalgamated in together into one big unit. And this happens over about a 36-hour period. Because if you look at this map, you can see how you got the original D-Day landing, and as the battle is getting further and further away, you're having a really tough time supplying your troops with beans and bullets. So it starts off, the analogy I use is I live here in Du Bois. And if I want to go get groceries, I go down to Superfoods and I pick up a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and that's fine for our analogy as long as we're working in the Normandy Peninsula. But we start getting further and further out. And now I got to drive to Riverton or Lander, Jackson. Okay, I can deal with it. By the time we hit Paris here, that is about equivalent to if I have to drive to Casper. That's about a 3-hour drive for me. And then eventually, I'm driving all the way to Cheyenne. And that's just untenable. That's untenable. So this round trip at that Cheyenne level, at that last stop, is not quite 700 miles round trip. That is a substantial undertaking to try to get our beans and bullets to our fighting men. So what the brass does is they put together what they call this Red Ball Express. And the Red Ball Express is made up primarily of segregated African American soldiers. About 75% of all the guys in the Red Ball Express are black soldiers. The drivers on these things are about 90% black soldiers. And these guys do an outstanding job. They do an exemplary job. So if you look at this road, you see the dotted line, and you got little arrows pointing in one direction. So this is all one big round trip, one-way drive. There is never, ever any oncoming traffic. Because some of these little French roads, this pathway that you guys are on right here, that's, a lot of times the French roads aren't much wider than that right there. So nobody but Red Ball Express is authorized to drive on this road. You're a French cabbie, and you're on our road, you will find an alternate route right now. Or this big old bumper on my record truck, I'm going to push you off in a ditch. If you're an American Jeep jockey and you're not a part of the Red Ball Express, you are going to find an alternate route right now, or I'm going to shove you off in a ditch. These vehicles here that you see, We've got several that are set up, you know, hauling beans and bullets, although I don't see many beans, they're just all bullets.
This
But
is the
you've also
end
got,
of
like,
part
these wrecker
2.
trucks.
I will
So if
have
something breaks
part
down,
3 in about 3
if it's a short
days.
distance, I'll tow you. But if it's a longer distance, this big old bumper, I'm shoving you